The crystal ballroom of the Everwood Grand Hotel was a symphony of ivory and gold. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling arched windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, shimmering fairies. The scent of 1,000 white roses and lilies hung heavy and sweet, a fragrant testament to the day's celebration. At the heart of it all stood Ethan Montgomery, his heart pounding a rhythm that matched the frantic, joyous energy of the room. He watched as the grand oak doors at the end of the aisle swung open, and there she was, Isabella. She was a vision, a masterpiece sculpted from lace and silk. Her dress, a cascade of intricate beadwork, shimmered with every step she took towards him. A delicate veil obscured her features, but Ethan didn't need to see her face to know the look in her eyes. He could feel it across the expanse of the ballroom, a love so profound, so absolute, it felt like the very center of his universe. Theirs had been a whirlwind romance, a storybook love affair that had swept them both off their feet. Ethan, a successful architect known for his sharp mind and even sharper designs, had been a man dedicated solely to his work. Then Isabella had walked into his life, a curator at a small but prestigious art gallery, and had redesigned his entire world. She was grace and intelligence, with a quiet strength that he found utterly captivating. She had a past shrouded in a gentle sadness, an orphan who had forged her own path in the world, and Ethan had vowed to spend the rest of his life filling her world with the light and love she had been denied. As she reached the altar, her father figure, an old family friend, placed her hand in Ethan's. Lifting the veil, Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. Her smile was radiant, her eyes, the color of warm honey, shimmering with unshed tears of joy. "You look beautiful," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "You're not so bad yourself, Mr. Montgomery," she whispered back, a playful glint in her eyes. The ceremony was a blur of heartfelt vows and tender promises. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the room erupted in applause. Ethan pulled Isabella into a kiss that was both a promise and a prayer, a seal on the beginning of their forever. The reception that followed was a lavish affair. Champagne flowed, a string quartet played Vivaldi, and guests mingled, their laughter echoing off the gilded ceilings. Ethan and Isabella moved through the crowd, a perfect picture of newlywed bliss, accepting congratulations and sharing embraces. Yet, amidst the sea of smiling faces, there was one person who watched them with an expression that was less than celebratory. Chloe Montgomery, Ethan's younger sister, stood near the towering, 7-tiered wedding cake, her arms crossed over her chest. At 22, Chloe was a stark contrast to her polished older brother. A fourth-year journalism student at the State University, she was sharp, inquisitive, and possessed a healthy dose of cynicism that often put her at odds with Ethan's more idealistic nature. She adored her brother, and for that reason, she had been wary of Isabella from the very beginning. It wasn't that she disliked her. Isabella was, on the surface, perfect, almost too perfect. Her stories about her past were always vague, her emotions always perfectly modulated. Chloe's journalistic instincts screamed that something was amiss, that the beautiful, serene woman who had so completely captured her brother's heart was hiding something behind her flawless facade. She had tried to voice her concerns to Ethan, but he had dismissed them as sisterly overprotectiveness. "Just give her a chance, Chloe," he had pleaded. "You'll see. She's the one." Chloe had tried. She had invited Isabella to lunch, asked her about her childhood, her family, her dreams. But Isabella was an expert at deflecting, at turning the conversation back around, leaving Chloe with a handful of beautifully phrased non-answers. Frustrated, Chloe had decided to do some digging of her own. As a budding investigative journalist, she had access to databases and resources that the average person didn't. What she had started to uncover had unsettled her deeply, but she hadn't found anything concrete enough to present to Ethan without sounding like a jealous, paranoid sister. She had decided to put her investigation on hold, to try and accept Isabella for her brother's sake. But the feeling of unease lingered. "A penny for your thoughts?" Chloe turned to see her brother smiling at her. "They're worth way more than a penny," she quipped, her expression softening. It was a beautiful ceremony, Ethan. You both look very happy. I am, he said, his eyes drifting back to Isabella, who was now charming a group of his business partners. More than I ever thought possible. He paused, his smile faltering slightly. You'll come around to her, won't you? It would mean the world to me if you two could be friends. Or at least not adversaries. I'm trying, Ethan. I really am, Chloe said, the words feeling like a lie on her tongue. For you. Later in the evening, as the party was in full swing, Isabella approached Chloe, a glass of champagne in her hand. Chloe, she said, her voice smooth as silk. I was hoping we could talk for a moment. In private. Chloe, surprised by the directness of the request, nodded. Of course. Where? There's a small sitting room just off the main hall, the Rose Room, I believe they call it. The staff is using it for some of the gift storage. It should be quiet there, Isabella suggested. All right, Chloe agreed, her curiosity piqued. As they walked, Chloe felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Isabella was serene, as always, but there was a new tension in her posture, a subtle hardness in her eyes that Chloe had never seen before. They entered the Rose Room, a small, opulent space filled with velvet armchairs and overflowing with beautifully wrapped wedding gifts. Isabella closed the door behind them, the click of the latch echoing in the sudden silence. I know you don't approve of me, Isabella began, her voice losing its sugary sweetness and taking on a sharper, more direct tone. I don't know what you're talking about, Chloe said, her defenses immediately going up. Oh, please, Chloe. Let's not play games, Isabella said with a humorless smile. I've seen the way you look at me. I've heard the questions you've been asking. You've been digging into my past. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. My brother is the most important person in the world to me. I'm just looking out for him. He doesn't need you to look out for him, Isabella shot back, her voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. He has me now, and I suggest you stop your little investigation. There's nothing to find, and you're only going to end up hurting Ethan and yourself. The veiled threat was unmistakable. For the first time, Chloe felt a genuine flicker of fear. This was not the gentle, soft-spoken woman her brother was in love with. This was someone else entirely, someone cold and calculating. What are you hiding, Isabella? Chloe pressed, her journalistic instincts overriding her fear. Isabella's eyes narrowed into slits. You have no idea who you're dealing with, she said, her voice barely audible. For Ethan's sake, drop it. This is your one and only warning. Before Chloe could respond, Isabella's expression shifted, the mask of the loving bride snapping back into place as the door opened and one of the bridesmaids poked her head in. Isabella, it's time to toss the bouquet. I'll be right there, Isabella chirped, her voice once again light and carefree. She gave Chloe one last, lingering look, a look that was both a promise and a threat, before sweeping out of the room. Chloe stood there for a long moment, her body trembling. Her suspicions had been confirmed in the most terrifying way possible. She had to tell Ethan. She had to tell him now. She pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling with the screen. She had compiled all of her research into a password-protected file, every inconsistency in Isabella's stories, every dead end, every hint of a past that had been deliberately erased. She had to show him. She made her way back towards the ballroom, her mind racing. But before she could find her brother, the wedding planner, a flustered woman with a clipboard, intercepted her. Chloe, thank goodness I found you. We're about to do the sibling dance. Your brother is looking for you. I need to talk to him first, Chloe stammered. It's urgent. It can wait 5 minutes, can't it? The planner insisted, gently but firmly steering her towards the dance floor. The dance was a painful charade. Chloe held onto her brother, her body stiff with tension, while he, oblivious, beamed down at her. See? This is nice, isn't it? He said. Chloe couldn't bring herself to answer. As soon as the music ended, she pulled away. Ethan, we have to talk. What is it? You look pale, he said, his brow furrowed with concern. Not here, she said, glancing around at the smiling guests. Meet me back in the Rose Room in 10 minutes. I have to show you something. Before he could ask any more questions, she turned and hurried away, disappearing into the crowd. 10 minutes later, Ethan slipped away from the party and made his way to the Rose Room. He was worried about Chloe. He had never seen her so agitated. He hoped this wasn't another one of her attempts to cast doubt on Isabella. He loved his sister, but he wished she would just accept his happiness. He pushed open the door to the Rose Room. Chloe, I'm here. What's so urgent? The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from a single ornate lamp in the corner. The air was still and strangely cold. The wedding gifts were piled high on a large mahogany table, their cheerful wrapping a stark contrast to the heavy silence. Chloe, he called out again, a flicker of irritation creeping into his voice. He took a step further into the room, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. And then he saw her. She was lying on the floor, tucked away in the narrow space between a velvet sofa and the wall. She was on her side, her back to him, her bridesmaid dress, a beautiful gown of deep crimson silk, bunched up around her waist. A single, crimson-colored silk sash, identical to the ones worn by the other bridesmaids, was wrapped tightly around her neck. Her face was turned away from him, but he could see the unnatural stillness of her body, the awful, final way she was lying there. Time seemed to freeze. The music from the ballroom, the distant sound of laughter, it all faded away into a deafening roar in his ears. Chloe, he whispered, the name a fragile, broken thing. He took a tentative step forward, then another, a dreadful, icy certainty creeping into his veins. He reached down and gently touched her shoulder. Her skin was cold. A sound, a guttural, inhuman cry of pure agony, ripped from Ethan's throat. He fell to his knees beside his sister's body, the perfect, joyous day shattering into a million irreparable pieces. The fairy tale was over. The nightmare had just begun. The piercing scream that tore through the Everwood Grand Hotel was a sound of such raw, primal grief that it sliced through the celebratory music and laughter like a blade. The joyous atmosphere of the crystal ballroom curdled in an instant, replaced by a confused, fearful silence. The music faltered and died. Guests turned to each other with wide, questioning eyes. Then, the first panicked shouts were heard, and chaos erupted. Ethan was on his knees, his mind a maelstrom of denial and horror. This couldn't be happening. It was a dream, a terrible, vivid nightmare from which he would soon awake. But the cold, still form of his sister on the floor was an unyielding, brutal reality. The crimson silk sash, a festive accessory just hours before, was now a gruesome ligature, a symbol of the violence that had stolen his sister from him. Hotel security was the first on the scene, followed moments later by a distraught and weeping Isabella, who rushed to Ethan's side, her face a mask of shocked disbelief. "Ethan, my God, what happened?" she cried, her hands fluttering over his shoulders, her perfect wedding dress now seeming like a cruel, mocking costume. He couldn't speak, couldn't form words. He could only stare at Chloe, his world reduced to this one horrific tableau. The arrival of the police turned the opulent hotel into a fortress. The wedding guests, once participants in a joyous celebration, were now potential witnesses or worse, suspects in a murder investigation. They were herded into a separate banquet hall, their festive attire a jarring contrast to the grim expressions on their faces. The crystal ballroom became a makeshift command center, its gilded tables now covered with police equipment instead of champagne glasses. Leading the investigation was Detective Miles Corbin, a veteran of the homicide division with a reputation for being methodical, unflappable, and possessing an almost uncanny ability to see through lies. He was a man in his late 50s, with weary eyes that had seen the worst of human nature, and a quiet, imposing presence that commanded respect. He surveyed the scene in the Rose Room with a practiced, dispassionate eye, taking in every detail: the position of the body, the ligature around the victim's neck, the piles of untouched wedding gifts. His initial focus was on the groom. Ethan, now wrapped in a blanket and in a state of profound shock, was gently being questioned by a uniformed officer. He was barely coherent, his account of finding his sister a jumble of fragmented sentences and choked sobs. Corbin observed him from a distance. The grief was palpable, raw, and seemingly genuine. Next, Corbin turned his attention to the bride. Isabella was the picture of a devastated wife and sister-in-law. She sat beside Ethan, her arm wrapped around him, her own tears staining her perfect makeup. She spoke to Corbin in a soft, trembling voice, recounting her day with a precision that was impressive, given the circumstances. She had been with guests with her bridesmaids on the dance floor. She had last seen Chloe during the reception, but couldn't recall the exact time. She claimed, no idea why anyone would want to harm her. Did Chloe have any enemies that you know of? Corbin asked, his voice gentle but firm. An ex-boyfriend? A rival at school? Isabella dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Not that I know of, she said, her voice catching. Chloe was spirited, very passionate about her beliefs. Perhaps she made an enemy through her journalism work? She was always chasing some big, controversial story. She painted a picture of Chloe as a reckless, crusading journalist who might have gotten in over her head, a plausible and convenient theory that deflected attention away from the family circle. Corbin took in her performance. It was flawless. The tears, the trembling voice, the protective posture over her new husband. It was everything one would expect from a grieving bride. But something felt off. It was too perfect, too polished. It was as if she were playing a part, a role she had rehearsed for. It was a flicker of a thought, a professional intuition honed over thousands of cases, but it was enough for Corbin to file it away. The initial hours of the investigation were a whirlwind of activity. Forensics teams swarmed the Rose Room, dusting for prints, collecting fibers, and documenting every inch of the scene. Every guest was interviewed, their alibis checked and rechecked. The timeline of the evening was meticulously pieced together, second by agonizing second. The medical examiner's preliminary report confirmed that Chloe had been strangled. The time of death was estimated to be sometime between 9:30 p.m. and 10 p.m., a narrow window during the peak of the reception. This was both good and bad news for the investigation. It meant the killer was almost certainly one of the wedding guests or hotel staff, but it also meant that dozens of people were in close proximity, creating a chaotic and confusing scene. Isabella's alibi, upon first inspection, was ironclad. During that crucial 30-minute window, they discovered she had recently broken up with a volatile ex-boyfriend, a fellow student who had reportedly not taken the breakup well. He was at the wedding, and several guests had reported seeing him drinking heavily and arguing with Chloe earlier in the evening. He immediately became a person of interest. They also looked into her journalistic work. Chloe was working on an exposé for her university paper about a local real estate developer with ties to organized crime. It was a dangerous story, and it was plausible that she had been silenced. The developer and his known associates were added to the list of potential suspects. Days turned into a week. The media frenzy was relentless. The wedding night murder, as the tabloids dubbed it, was a national sensation. The tragic story of a beautiful bride, a grieving groom, and a promising young life cut short was irresistible. Isabella, in her few public appearances, was the epitome of grace under pressure, a tragic heroine who had her fairy tale snatched away. She stood by Ethan's side at the funeral, a black veil covering her face, a pillar of strength for a man who seemed to have crumbled. Ethan, meanwhile, was lost in a fog of grief. He was haunted by his last conversation with his sister. "I have to show you something." What had she wanted to show him? What was so urgent that it couldn't wait? He tortured himself with the what-ifs. What if he had gone with her immediately? Could he have saved her? He told the police about her cryptic words, but without her phone or laptop, which were missing and presumed to have been taken by the killer, there was no way to know what she had discovered. Corbin, however, hadn't forgotten his initial flicker of doubt about Isabella. While his team pursued the more obvious leads, he conducted a quiet, discreet background check on the grieving bride. On the surface, her story held up. Isabella Rossi, born in Chicago, orphaned at a young age after a tragic car accident, raised in a series of foster homes before earning a scholarship to a prestigious art history program. She had no criminal record, no known associates that raised any red flags. She was, by all accounts, a model citizen, a self-made woman who had overcome a difficult past. But Corbin was a man who believed that the devil was in the details. He sent a detective to Chicago to pull the hard copies of the records, to speak to people who might have known her. And that's when the first crack in Isabella's perfect story appeared. The foster home she claimed to have spent most of her teenage years in had no record of an Isabella Rossi. The high school she had listed on her college applications had her enrolled, but her file was unusually thin, with no photographs and missing large chunks of information. It was as if she had appeared out of thin air at the age of 15. Then came the second, more significant crack. The police forensics lab had been working tirelessly to recover data from the hotel's security camera system. Most of the cameras in the public areas had been disabled for the private event at the request of the family for privacy, a common but now deeply regrettable decision. However, a single, forgotten service camera in a back corridor, one that led from the kitchen area to a service elevator near the Rose Room, had been active. The footage was grainy and the angle was poor, but it was there. Corbin watched the footage in a darkened viewing room. He fast-forwarded through hours of hotel staff coming and going. Then, at 9:35 p.m., he saw it. A figure in a large, flowing white dress, her back to the camera, slipped into the corridor from the ballroom side. She was obscured by shadows, her face never visible, but the dress was unmistakable. The figure disappeared down the corridor in the direction of the Rose Room. Less than 10 minutes later, at 9:44 p.m., the same figure emerged, moving quickly back towards the ballroom. It was a ghost, a whisper of a clue. It wasn't enough to prove anything. It could have been any number of guests in a white or off-white gown. But combined with the inconsistencies in her background, it was enough for Corbin to intensify his focus. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A young, tech-savvy detective on Corbin's team had been trying to trace Chloe's missing phone. He had an idea. What if Chloe, a cautious and intelligent journalism student, had a cloud backup service that automatically synced her files? After getting the necessary warrants, they gained access to her cloud account. And there it was, tucked away in a folder labeled IR Project, was a comprehensive, meticulously documented file. Corbin opened the file, his eyes scanning the contents. It was a complete, unofficial background check on Isabella. But the name at the top of the report wasn't Isabella Rossi. It was Abigail Finch. The report laid out a shocking, hidden history. Abigail Finch was the daughter of a notorious con artist couple in the Midwest who had been arrested for fraud and embezzlement when she was a teenager. Abigail herself had a sealed juvenile record for being an accomplice in several of their scams. After her parents were imprisoned, she had disappeared from the system, only to reemerge 2 years later in Chicago with a new name and a completely fabricated backstory. Chloe had found it all. She had uncovered the original police reports, the name change documents, even a grainy mugshot of a defiant, 15-year-old Abigail Finch. The resemblance to Isabella was undeniable. The file also contained saved emails and text messages. Chloe had reached out to a social worker from her past, who confirmed Abigail's history and expressed shock that she had resurfaced. The final document in the folder was a partially written exposé, with the headline, "The Serpent in the Montgomery Garden. How a Con Artist Seduced an Empire." Chloe hadn't been investigating a local developer. She had been investigating her future sister-in-law. And she had found the truth. Corbin sat back in his chair, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with a sickening finality. The motive was no longer a mystery. Chloe had discovered Isabella's secret and was going to reveal it. The argument in the Rose Room wasn't a warning from Isabella. It was a confrontation by Chloe. Isabella, her meticulously crafted world on the brink of collapse, had been pushed to the edge. The perfect alibi was an illusion. The bouquet toss, the dance with her father-in-law, it was all a performance. A carefully timed series of public appearances designed to create an unbreakable timeline. But in the 10 minutes that she had disappeared down that service corridor, She had found the time to silence the one person who could destroy her. The grieving bride was a killer. And now, Corbin had the proof he needed to tear her beautiful, deceptive world apart. The air in the interrogation room was cold and sterile. The bare, white walls seemed to absorb all sound, creating an unnerving, clinical silence. Isabella sat at the metal table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was no longer in mourning attire. She wore an elegant, tailored navy blue dress, her hair pulled back in a chic chignon. She looked less like a grieving widow and more like a CEO about to enter a boardroom negotiation. She had agreed to come to the station voluntarily, believing it was a routine follow-up interview. Her composure was, as always, flawless. Across the table, Detective Corbin watched her, his expression unreadable. He had spent the last 2 days preparing for this moment, strategizing, anticipating her every move. He knew he was not just dealing with a killer, but with a lifelong performer, a woman who had built her entire existence on a foundation of lies. Breaking her would require not a hammer, but a scalpel. "Thank you for coming in, Mrs. Montgomery," Corbin began, his tone polite, almost gentle. "Of course, Detective," Isabella replied, her voice smooth and even. "Anything I can do to help find the person who did this to Chloe and my family." The "my family" was a nice touch, Corbin thought, a subtle reinforcement of her role. He slid a file across the table, but did not open it. "We've been reconstructing the timeline of the wedding night. It's a complex process, as you can imagine. So many people, so much happening. I can only imagine," she said, a flicker of what looked like sympathy in her eyes. "It was all such a blur." "Indeed, but technology helps. We were able to recover some data that has been illuminating." Corbin paused, letting the silence stretch. "We recovered the security footage from a service corridor near the Rose Room." Isabella's posture remained unchanged, but Corbin noticed a subtle, almost imperceptible tightening of the muscles in her jaw. "Oh? I wasn't aware there were cameras back there." "Most people weren't," Corbin said, his eyes fixed on hers. "At 9:35 p.m., a woman in a wedding dress is seen entering that corridor. 10 minutes later, she leaves. This is, of course, during the estimated time of Chloe's death." Isabella offered a small, sad smile. "Detective, there were hundreds of guests, and several women were wearing white or ivory gowns. It could have been anyone." "True," Corbin conceded, "but it's a strange coincidence, isn't it? That someone matching your description would be in that exact location at that exact time." He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Mrs. Montgomery, what do you know about a woman named Abigail Finch?" The name hit her like a physical blow. For the first time since he'd met her, Isabella's mask slipped. A flash of pure, undiluted panic flickered in her eyes before being ruthlessly suppressed. Her face paled, her carefully manicured hands gripping each other in her lap. I don't know anyone by that name," she stammered, the first crack appearing in her perfect composure. Corbin opened the file. He turned it around and slid it across the table. On top was a grainy, black and white photograph. It was a juvenile mugshot of a 15-year-old girl with defiant eyes and a familiar face. "The state of Illinois disagrees," he said, his voice hardening. "Abigail Finch, daughter of noted con artists Martin and Eleanor Finch. A juvenile record for fraud, theft, and accessory to embezzlement. Disappeared from the foster care system at 16, only for a brilliant and accomplished art curator named Isabella Rossi to appear in Chicago 2 years later with a fabricated past." Isabella stared at the picture of her younger self, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The walls of the interrogation room, and the walls of the life she had so painstakingly built, were closing in on her. "This is insane," she whispered, shaking her head. "This is a mistake. Someone is trying to frame me." "No one is framing you, Abigail," Corbin said, using her real name like a weapon. "We found Chloe's research. We found it all. She knew who you were. She knew everything." He laid out another document from the Filia printout of the exposé Chloe had been writing. He watched as Isabella's eyes scanned the headline, "The Serpent in the Montgomery Garden." "She was obsessed with me," Isabella hissed, her voice losing its cultured polish and taking on a raw, desperate edge. "She was jealous. She was trying to destroy my happiness, my marriage." "Was she?" Corbin pressed. "Or was she trying to protect her brother from a woman who had lied about her entire identity? A woman who married him not for love, but for his name, his money, his security." "I love Ethan," she shrieked, the sound jarring in the small, quiet room. "You don't know anything. I know that Chloe confronted you in the Rose Room," Corbin continued, his voice relentless, a steady, unyielding force. "She gave you an ultimatum, didn't she? Tell Ethan the truth or she would. And you couldn't let that happen. You couldn't let your perfect world come crashing down. So you silenced her." He gestured to the crime scene photos, to the brutal image of the crimson sash around Chloe's neck. "You saw your future slipping away, and in a moment of panic and rage, you killed her. You took her phone and laptop to hide the evidence, and then you walked back into that ballroom and tossed the bouquet as if nothing had happened." At that moment, the door to the interrogation room opened. Ethan stood there, his face ashen, his eyes hollowed out with a pain that was almost unbearable to witness. He had been in the adjacent observation room, listening to every word. He held a copy of Chloe's file in his trembling hand. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice a broken whisper. He looked at the woman he had married, the woman he had vowed to love and cherish just days before, and saw a complete stranger. Everything. Was it all a lie? Seeing Ethan, the one person whose opinion truly mattered to her, the prize she had fought so hard to win, finally shattered Isabella's resolve. The years of carefully constructed lies, the decades of running from her past, it all came crashing down in a torrent of desperate, ugly sobs. "I did it for you," she cried, her words tumbling out in a frantic, incoherent confession. "I did it for us." She was going to ruin everything. "I came from nothing, Ethan. Nothing. I had to fight for every single thing I have. I built this life, this person, so I could be worthy of someone like you. She was going to take it all away. Couldn't let her. It was an accident. I didn't mean to. I just wanted her to be quiet." Her confession was a chilling window into her twisted psyche. In her mind, murder was not an act of evil, but a necessary, albeit tragic, act of self-preservation. She was not a monster, but a victim of circumstance, forced to take desperate measures to protect the life she believed she deserved. Ethan stared at her, his face a canvas of horror, grief, and a betrayal so profound it seemed to have carved new lines into his face. The woman he loved wasn't real. She was a character, a phantom, and that phantom had murdered his sister in cold blood. He turned and walked out of the room without another word, the sound of her desperate sobs echoing behind him. The aftermath was a brutal, public spectacle. The trial of Abigail Finch, aka Isabella Montgomery, was the story of the year. The details of her past, her deceptions, and the cold-blooded murder of her sister-in-law on her wedding day were laid bare for the world to see. She was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Ethan, life became a quiet, desolate landscape. He divorced Isabella, or rather, Abigail, and sold the house they were supposed to build a life in, a place now tainted by blood and lies. The Montgomery name, once a symbol of architectural success and social standing, was now forever linked to a sensational and tragic crime. He retreated from public life, a man haunted by two ghosts, the sister he had lost, and the wife who had never truly existed. Sometimes, in the dead of night, he would pull out his wedding album. He would look at the photographs of the perfect day, at the smiling faces, at the radiant bride in her white dress. He would search her eyes for a sign, a clue, a flicker of the monster that lurked beneath the beautiful surface. But he could never find it. All he could see was a perfect reflection of the love he had felt, a love that had been the greatest deception of all. The veiled promise of that day had been fulfilled in the most horrific way imaginable, for it was only after death had parted them that the truth, in all its terrible glory, was finally unveiled.